All right. I'm going to introduce a new buzzword. Yeah. I'm in the business of shifting left to right. Sorry. All right. I'm going to talk about bypassing security controls because the topic that was just initiated is spot on. Introducing security in cloud native app development is really not something simple and honestly not thought of when they actually invented it. So, okay, grab one. So I'm Philippe Bogaerts. I work for Fortinet. I basically do everything which is around AWS, Kubernetes, some stuff around AI. That's during day. During the other part of the day, I'm one of the co-founders and co-organizers of Brucon. I don't know who knows Brucon. It's a hacking conference in Belgium every year. If you want to attend, be quick because it sells out very quickly. It's in Lamont and it's hacking for beer. So if you don't like hacking, there's at least beer. Beside that, I do some pen testing training around AI and blah, 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 blah. If you're interested in hacking security training, in April, we have some training announcement on Brucon. Check it out. It's cloud, it's Kubernetes, it's AI. So I think the right audience. So I guess who's a developer? Then I know how much people I have to fight with afterwards. So I guess this is nothing new for you. You know way better how to build code than I do. I'm not a developer. My only experience is assembly and C, which is probably 30 years ago, in writing viruses and stuff like this. But my point is that there is a lot of stuff happening, and it's just actually said, you guys have a lot of work trying to build code that works. Yeah. I'm coming from the security angle. I'm a pen tester. And my proud is to basically say after 3 days, hey guys, I found 10 bugs, fix it. See you next time. And I admit I need to apologize. Sometimes it's fun hacking stuff. Yeah, it's way more difficult to fix it. And the reason I dare to stand here is actually to tell you our side of the story and how we can basically meet in the middle. Because for every phase in your software development cycle, there are some security steps you can take, which could basically make your life easier, security people and DevSecOps people life way easier. So, because when I talk about security, I basically use, you have a developer, he writes some code in a tool, puts it in GitHub, puts it in a pipeline, and it's to production. That's what we tell customers when we go and present about shift left. Life is not as easy as that. Basically, there are probably multiple teams that have DevOps principles, probably a bunch of teams that hate DevOps, probably using multiple repos. Maybe you're lucky it's in the same system, but if I look at my company, we have GitLab, we have GitHub, we have some internal runners. Nobody knows where. Pipelines, multiple pipelines, yeah. And everything is, let's say, push to cloud. I still want to see the customer that does 5,000 commits on a weekly basis, but yeah, that's what I told us. But the idea here is to be very fast in delivering new software. Yeah, if you want to create a new feature, well, you basically write a code, you push it, and automatically and magically it ends up somewhere in a Kubernetes cluster. The fact that it needs to be fast almost immediately and so on and so forth basically means that there is no room for a pen tester that comes in and tells you, hey, this is not fine, because it's nearly impossible to do so. And that's why you need to try to include the security into this life cycle. But that also means that you have to automate the security. Yeah. And yeah, that's still a very difficult point today to do, because there are stuff that you basically cannot see with security tools, and you have the false positives, and somebody comes and tells you have 5,000 issues in your code. You cannot fix them all. So it's a pretty complex problem to solve. Now, I was actually thinking earlier today, what if I can convince every developer to write secure code? Is problem solved? No, because as you actually look at, if you write a few lines of Python code and you want to have it in production, there are so many steps that are added. Libraries, packages, dependencies, containers. Then they push it in a Kubernetes manifest. And then there's some guy that prefers Terraform or the other one, Pulumi, to deploy it to the cloud, and so on and so forth. Of course, you need observability. But you see the point. It's a very, very, very complex thing to solve. And at every phase in this life cycle, you just add potentially more trouble. If I write an AI agent, what is it, 10 lines of Python code? It works. But at the end of the day, before it is in Kubernetes, I have thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities somewhere dispersed. So that's the problem. And in my favor, that's the problem that security people have to deal with. A hacker only needs to find one weak point in this entire setup, and it's game over. I'm still surprised that the number one compromise is still leaked AWS credentials. Although when you push them to GitHub, they're revoked in a matter of less than a second. But then people push them to GitHub or to GitLab, or they put them in Slack, whatever. So that's the problem, and it's very, very, very difficult to basically oversee and to secure it all. So a few tips on how to write secure containers or insecure containers, depending point of view. I can use these slides for years and years and years and years, and every time when you present about it, the same problem does exist. And I found a very nice phrase not that long ago. It's basically convenience over security. Because if you think about it, if you want to play with containers and it becomes extremely difficult to actually run a container, people use other stuff. Like, for example, if you deploy a pod on Kubernetes, on vanilla Kubernetes, it probably works. If you want to deploy it on OpenShift, you probably already have some stuff to fix, because by default, it won't run out of security concerns. But still, you can look at the latest containers and still find all these simple, stupid, same things. I'm not going to run through them all, otherwise Evelyn will be mad at me. But for example, using Ubuntu containers with latest. Everybody thinks latest is finest. You would be very surprised if you scan this container, how many vulnerabilities there are and how many are in the previous version. Fix it. The entire idea of automation, first of all, is that it is automated and that it can reproduce exactly the same deployment. If you use latest, chances are that your CI/CD pipeline are using a different version than production is. A lot of companies, at least we suggested in the old days, to use base images of golden images, where you at least know upfront on what you are building software. We had tools in the beginning that could basically enforce, okay, if you don't use Ubuntu version that, it will not deploy to production. I think Red Hat is doing the same with these images which are supported. It's always a good step, but simply copy-pasting stuff from ChatGPT or Google is not always the best idea. The problem arises when you start using an Ubuntu image, maybe known vulnerabilities and so on. It's condensed, but then it's up to you. You start installing software, you add bugs and vulnerabilities. I was actually looking, I don't know if somebody, I'm not going to make a commercial break here, but we looked at ShaneGuard, how difficult it is to use a hardened image to get into production. You need almost to be an expert in Docker before you understand what they are doing. Yeah, but this is all not that such great ideas. There's way too much stuff in these container images, which in essence is perhaps not that bad, but what if it gets compromised? Yeah, if curl is installed, you can basically do anything. Yeah, you just copy your own code. Okay, you take care of that, so that's secure. But yeah, these are potential risks that you add. Strange thing is, if you run this, it works fine. Although everybody says containers should not run as root. What is the default behavior? It runs as root. Yeah. I don't have a time here, but you can actually easily write a container or run a container that owns a system in a one-liner. It's very, very, very simple. If you want to really be risky, use stuff like this. Yeah. For example, from a security point of view, or from a development point of view, this might be very logical. But if you use these outdated versions, you really introduce thousands of vulnerabilities, and I'm not exaggerating here. Adding things like a WAR file, from a security point of view, it's nothing more than a zip file in which you can hide malware. Yeah? And there aren't that many tools that are actually going to look inside of that file to see if there is malware actually inside of it. Yeah? If you really want to be risky, use things like privileged or --pit host or --net host or whatever. You would say, who is using this, for God's sake? Almost every security product is using this. This means that if you have a bug or you have some privilege escalation attack and somebody can actually go into these pods, whether this is our tool or this is Cilium or this is Calico, you basically own the box. Yeah? If you know a little bit about Linux, it's very easy to mount the file system. To run stateful pods is basically too easy. Yeah. Same as mounting Docker socket or containerd socket or log entries. For example, if you use, what is it, Fluent and stuff like this, they mount the logging system. There have been attacks where you put a system link or a link into that folder so that you could actually pinpoint it back to a container. I guess it still works. Yeah? So be very careful here. Writing a container or a Docker file is more complicated than, if you want, I have a hacking training for free, which is somewhere online with all these tricks and tips explained. I always amuse myself to scan publicly official images. This was the last time I gave this talk, and for the fun, which was end of 2023, I think, and this is a week ago, exactly the same image. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and still it is used. It's not that it's such a super outdated image. Same for Nginx. Who doesn't use Nginx? And okay, criticals or highs, I would be tended to say if you have like 2 or 3 critical vulnerabilities in a container, think a little bit about it. Yeah. This is from a while ago. I didn't check if it still works, but a while ago there was like you have to use this distruless images. This one is a distruless image with 1 binary, and it can do command injection. Yeah, you can read it. It only contains OpenSSL as the binary, so there is really nothing in it. You cannot install anything, but you still can have a shell if you want. Yeah? So don't underestimate the danger of these things, because the smallest code vulnerability gives you access to this. That's why the responsibility is as well with development as with the guys building these images and checking and so on and so forth. You can use my image if you want, super secure. This one is infected with a backdoor. I had to update the slide. It's already 9 years that is in the Docker Hub, and it still gives exactly the same thing if you scan Ubuntu or you scan the infected one, and this is a working backdoor. This number isn't correct, it's 79, but I didn't want to put that on the slide, but it still works. Yeah. So check these things, and not only with Trivi. Yeah. The problem is that you need to scan it with multiple tools to really make sure that there is nothing in it. And yeah, the most stupid mistake as such is, yeah, don't use something that's called xxradar Ubuntu infected, but I still have downloads because it is in some pipelines I published, or in some CI/CD tools, or in a GitHub action, and still apparently people find it interesting. I don't know if you ever play around with OCI artifacts. Actually, it comes from the idea that you can put a NSBOM in a container image and some additional information. Well, I already have a container in the Docker Hub with malware for, I think, 3 or 4 years, and nobody ever. No scanner sees it. Trivi doesn't see it. You really have to have these malware scanners, they can see it, or these eBPF kind of tool, they can see it. But a normal scanner like Trivi or some commercial products, they just say, okay, cool, fine, go on. Scan your container registries, because all the stuff you push, check, fix, where do they end up? In a container registry. And there it sits and lives forever. I was once in the Netherlands, and someone was very proud telling me that this container was already up and running for more than 3 years. Yeah, so check this. The problem is, if you push something to GitHub or you push something in the Kubernetes manifest, and you did the right thing by pinpointing the tags, the stuff remains in these registries. And who logs? If I have to clean up my Docker Hub, I have a few weeks of holidays in front of me. So be careful with it, because that's how the bad stuff happens. Yeah. How can you write secure code? Please check these things like OWASP top 10. There are a lot of projects that explain you what the pitfalls are for writing code. I've been involved with OWASP already 18 years. Yeah, and it's already 18 years we talk about cross-site scripting. It's already 18 years we talk about SQL injection. And what do we see right now? Hey, cool, we can do SQL injection with ChatGPT. Cool. So check these things out. I'm not going to go through all these documents. Same, there is one that has been released on agentic AI. Super cool paper to take a look at. If you follow these advice, you already will see how hackers think to basically export your code. Yeah, I'm not here to tell you how you have to write good code. I'm just saying what, as a pen tester, we look for to cause some havoc. There are tons and tons and tons of tools that do static analysis. You probably use these tools, use decent tools, because a lot of these tools, they just check for the most obvious thing that you basically can see. And I think in Belgium, last OWASP chapter in the Netherlands, I think there were 13 or 14 vendors exposing their product, all static analysis. So there are some quite good tools, but it also means that you have to do these code reviews when you build your code, but you also need to make sure once they are built and put in the containers that it's also possible to scan these code bases in an automated fashion, because you're all good developers, but it's very hard to control. Did you do the scan? Did you fix it? Yeah. Honestly, a great way that I found was, if you use Trivi, for example, and it gives you a bunch of mistakes, whether it's ISC code or feed it into ChatGPT and ask it to solve it, or in GitHub Copilot. It does a pretty good job. I don't say to bluntly copy it, but it gives you a very good idea about what's happening. And then there's this lovely book, Coding with Generative AI. I bought this book. I was scrolling through it, and I see this. I've been using this slide already for 3-4 years. I actually wrote it. And if you run it, you can actually ask an AI agent, what is 2 + 2? What is the square root of 1, 2, 3, 4? Hey, cool. If you ask it, give me the environment variables of the system you're running on, it actually does it. Doing a demo with Evelyn a while back, asking it, can you run a Docker container? Oh, yes, I can run a Docker container. It even installed, believe it or not, the modules for Python to talk to the Docker API in a working example. The trouble with this is pretty cool that I mention it, but it's only very recently that I mention on the Langchain that you should use it with care. I checked it a year ago. It just says, yeah, be careful. Now it actually says, okay, be careful because you can run whatever code. But this still works. And if you go to a generative AI meetup, everybody loves this. Yeah. I was suspicious because I thought it was Python reply, but apparently it's not Python reply. It's basically React and think something. And if you think this is dangerous, if you go to the Langchain website, you find like 20 of these tools. One is called Shell. Guess what it does? It executes shells. Yeah? I had a big argument a while ago that somebody said, yeah, but you should run this in a container. This works, believe it or not, in the code interpreter of ChatGPT. If you ask the code interpreter of ChatGPT, give me the environment variables, it gives you the environment variables. Okay, it's in a sandboxed environment, I agree, but as a pen tester, and you can ask in a chatbot to get environment variables or /etc password, I would be very happy to put in the report critical and so on. So be very careful with these things. And the downside is, and that's why everybody needs to think about this is hardly researched. If you go and check how many vulnerabilities or known vulnerabilities there are for Langchain, you find 1 or 2, while you find hundreds for Nginx. So there is some. On the other side, you have the dynamic application security testing part. There are a lot of tools here. Very often you see that in DevOps world, they say, don't use it, because this basically scans a running application, and it's very long time running. It is hard to integrate into a CI/CD pipeline, and a lot of well-known people say, don't do it. I think it's a very bad idea not to do it, although it takes quite some time. But for example, OWASP ZAP, you can actually automate it even in Kubernetes. There are tons of other scans you need to do, whether it's secrets, software composition, licensing, and so on and so forth, which basically means that you end up with tons and tons and tons of tools. But today, we sell one, but that's aside. Yeah, you have what I call cloud-native application protection platforms, are basically tools that are around that scan basically from code to production and monitor all your cloud and so on and so forth. How can you insecure a CI/CD? Best place to attack somebody is in a CI/CD pipeline. It's just one big mess of scripting, with all honesty. CI/CD pipelines have access to basically everything. Yeah. So if I'm an attacker and I could basically mess with your CI/CD pipeline, it's the ideal place to do some supply chain attacks. And up to today, there are very little tools that actually can secure a CI/CD pipeline. Yeah? I'm not saying that you cannot integrate a security tool, but actually seeing and monitoring if a CI/CD pipeline behaves correctly is not that obvious. Yeah? That backdoor container I had does work in GitHub Actions. And you can have a reverse shell to a GitHub Action runner. Yeah? I think we once tried it with Azure Container Apps. It also works. Yeah? So CI/CD systems, typically you have these, okay, I just use GitLab because I need to use one. I typically use something else, Martin. But it's exactly the same, yeah? Somewhere you need to run these pipelines, whether it's in the cloud or on a runner. If you use GitHub, you can have private runners, which is pretty cool. But from an attacking side, it's even cooler because it means that you can attack a SaaS service while the stuff is actually running inside of your data centers. Yeah? And it's not that difficult to spin up a runner. Yeah? Besides all the side effects of doing this, I actually tried this with multiple CI/CD pipelines, and every OWASP top 10 bug, like non-validating parameters, parameter passing, command injection. You can go through the entire top 10. They did work on this version of GitLab. This means that if one pipeline triggers another, you can actually, even system environment variables can be overridden. Yeah? And I'm saying this is not only to GitLab, it works basically everywhere. Yeah? So just imagine that you create a Docker container image and it triggers another repo to build a manifest for Kubernetes. You would assume this is all secured and authenticated, but then just go and look at all the CVEs that exist for GitLab, yeah, or IOCD or whatever. Yeah, they all have like super high critical vulnerabilities. Yeah, and at the end of the day, the entire authentication is what? Authentication towards that UI. Yeah. Yeah, these are some examples, but even in GitLab, like a job ID, you can override it. Yeah, you can override a tag with colon and some bash scripting, and it does actually work. Yeah? If you run a container in GitLab with a backdoor, you have a backdoor. Yeah, so it means that people can actually log in and mess in whatever is cloned in that runner. Yeah? So if you want to have a sweet spot of where to go and find vulnerabilities or build a security product, that's the place to be. Also monitor what is happening in these runners, because otherwise you can actually connect from GitHub runners to the internet. Not only to pull in something, also to pull in containers or whatever. Yeah? In securing Kubernetes, it's even easier. I guess everybody more or less knows what Kubernetes is, so I'm not going to take Evelyn's minutes. But everybody thinks like running a Kubernetes pod or deployment is easy. Yeah, you go on ChatGPT, you get 5 lines, you copy paste it, and it works. I once tried to basically use, I think it's Nginx if I don't mistake, and actually wanted, I don't know what it was, but I actually wanted to get rid of all the vulnerability alerts. That's what I ended up with instead of 5 or 6 lines. Nobody can make this up. You need a lot of expertise and a lot of know-how about Kubernetes to actually do this. Yeah? And putting Kubernetes stuff in production is even more challenging. And then everybody says, yeah, but decent Kubernetes, you need probes, you need lifecycle, you need affinity, and you turn it all on, you run these scanners, and they say, hey, you have no readiness probe, you have no liveness probe, you're bad. And they lower your security code. And then I got in a fight with the people from Kubernetes, because this is an exec probe. This is the HTTP probe. And I put in this stuff. And so if you run this Kubernetes manifest, it basically just updates and installs curl. I think this is the nice example. But you can install netcat and so on and so forth. And you can actually run backdoors. Now, if I show this here, you all say like, yeah, all right, I can see this like 10 miles up front. I didn't find one scanner that actually finds this. On the contrary, this scanner, it just hires my, or lowers my security score. It says, yes, you have a readiness probe. Yes, you have a liveness probe. You're good. Yeah. Same with an HTTP GET probe. You might think this is safer. We basically try to do this, which is not as obvious, although it connects to the outside world, which is perhaps not that obvious. But you can put in the most dangerous web attacks. You can put in cross-site scripting. You can put in SQL injection. We even managed to inject, I forgot the name, we'll come back, but there was a very bad attack that could have a reverse shell with a HTTP header. Somebody knows it? We forgot the name. And I was actually doubting that it was working. That's why I put a firewall in front of it that actually says, look, we've seen and figured out that this is this attack. Nothing, nada, nix, found this attack. So, and this was on probes. We tried it on pod lifecycle management, which is something I didn't even know it exists. It even works better. Like this, it's obvious that this is a backdoor. Nothing detects it. All right, except who? ChatGPT. So you might be pro or con, I don't mind, but if you put this into ChatGPT and you ask it, do you think it's a risky endeavor? Yeah, it will tell you yes or no. Yeah? I think I have a screenshot somewhere. So securing Kubernetes is pretty challenging, because you're very often confronted with network policies, pod security admission, auditing, container scanning, drift, and so on and so forth, which is very hard to do. Basically, top-notch security, typically expensive, and if you want to do it with a commercial enterprise product. A cool one I found was Robusta. It's open source. And one of the things we found, it basically, every time you update a deployment or an operator updates a deployment in Kubernetes, it actually logs the change. We even found security products. You see, it moved a scanner from one repo to another, which is pretty scary, because you don't have to do anything for it. It just does it. Yeah. I know for sure that from a security point of view, this would never been accepted. Yeah. Because if you would implement anything like OPA policies, or this would basically be forbidden. Yeah. But they do it straight out of the operator, so they don't even pass through the. There's some pretty cool tools. I don't know if you know Tetragon, but it's pretty easy. It uses eBPF. You can find a lot of these nasty things. If you don't like Cilium, you can use Falco. This is more YAML. This is more JSON and YAML, but there are some cool open source tools like Falco Sidekick that you can see it. But you would be very surprised to see how many alerts you get. I was actually preparing a talk for something else, and I was, why the heck do I need to explain it? But if you look at how many AWS CloudTrail logs you get per hour, or if you multi-cloud, these are like thousands and thousands of alerts and logs per hour. How would you possibly, if you get them, even fix it or find it? It's impossible. Yeah. So that's why I say don't always blame the developers. Yeah, because these things were never built with the idea of being the most secure thing in the world. So check out these things. They're pretty interesting. Even if you do it in QA or test, you will quickly see what your issues are. And I always failed the CKS exam for whatever reason, but they're pretty fond of seccomp. Again, this is system calls and syscalls, which is pretty difficult, at least for somebody that is managing infrastructure. Yeah, that's just the reason why nobody probably uses this. But it might be very handy to take a look at it. I found a great tool. I don't know if you know it, Scattershark. It's basically Wireshark. You should know Wireshark, but for system calls. So you can basically trace an entire execution of a program, dump it in a file, and you can open it and you can do all the features like you have in Wireshark. You can do it in system calls, but it shows you really what's happening at the syscall level in an app. So you would actually see that it is trying to get to it is a password, or it tries to set up a socket or something. Pretty cool tool. It's free. It's new, and you can actually just say dump this container, and you can actually see whatever happened in that container. Super, super, super handy, really. And then you can filter on it. You can even do follow trace. So, for example, one thing we noticed was, can we intercept encrypted traffic? If you do curl HTTPS, whatever, you might say, yeah, it's encrypted. Of course, at the socket level, it's encrypted. But if the context or whatever you get back from curl is dumped in a file or to standard out, if you just filter on FD1, file descriptor 1, you can actually say follow trace, and you actually see whatever curl or whoever did. It's pretty cool. And this is only syscalls. Yeah? So if you use eBPF, it's even more powerful. If you think it's too difficult, again, I'm back with my ChatGPT friend. But if you dump your syscall trace into ChatGPT and you ask it, what is it actually doing? It gives you an entire story of what happens. And first I thought, just figure out there's a curl and an URL. But it's actually so correct that if you ask, tell me the line number where you open etc password or etc host, it tells you which line number in the trace is actually doing it. So my opinion is 99% correct. It could help you a lot in trying to analyze. And then last but not least, my boss always told me, and I never believed him, the next big thing is identity and access management. It is so complicated to get a view on identity and access management in anything which is cloud, or whether this is your code development tool which is running in a container, or it is running in AWS and Azure or in Kubernetes. They all work differently to make things like. And you would be very surprised if you do a default install of a security tool. This is coming from a security tool. There was one that actually gave admin right to the default account in the default namespace. So, and there are very, very, very little tools that can actually show it. This one could, but they removed the free version. You might see this in the logging, but Evelien can tell you more about it. But that means that you have to go and check all the audit logs, of course, of your environment. So my conclusion and my gratitude to every developer, DevOps is a very, very, very difficult thing to implement. Yeah. I actually created this slide for another presentation, but just think about it. And it was actually said in the beginning, developers, they talk totally different language than the ops guys. And then you have the security guys, which make it just simply sometimes they come to me and they say, this is a compliance violation. Yeah, I categorize it as blah, blah, blah security, typically. If somebody says to me like, yeah, I don't know, your disk is not encrypted in AWS. Yeah, probably 90% is not encrypted. Yeah, but it's just how you look at things. Yeah, but at the end of the day, if somebody tells you that if your code is stolen, it costs you millions, then it might make sense. So yeah, you have all these great toolings, but yeah, I know it's cliche, but in DevOps, there's also this mentality, this culture of DevOps that you need to implement. And honestly, there are tools today like cloud native application protection. There are tons of them. We have one, Palo Alto has one, Fortinet has one, Wiz. There are like, I don't know, probably 20 tools. But the cool thing about these tools is that they can basically take all the scanning information from the developer pipelines to runtime cloud that basically put it all in a very expensive database. Yeah, they run analytics, machine learning on it, not anymore to basically detect a vulnerability, yeah, but to try to find abnormal behavior. Yeah? For example, if you always say these same API calls, and now somebody starts to do list secret, they will say, okay, it's unusual that this account tries to list secrets. Yeah, it's unusual that we see traffic coming from China to our Kubernetes cluster, and these will basically give you a lot of security information, of course, but also a lot of anomaly detection and so on and so forth. On top, all these tools, they have integrations out of research. Yeah? They know the latest CVEs, they know the botnets and so on and so forth. So they can give you basically, I'm not always totally fond of what I'm going to say right now, but prioritized alerts so that you know what is the most obvious thing to fix. Yeah. I typically hear people tell me, yeah, because this is a critical vulnerability, but there is no proof of concept code available to exploit. It's not important. I find it a little bit very short cut it. But these tools will at least tell you where to prioritize. And believe me, you still end up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of alerts. Thank you. If you want the slide deck, I can share it with Maarten and the team, or you go to this and you find all the other crap I ever wrote. Thank you. Any questions? I have like 5 minutes. No questions? Once? Yeah.
You talk a lot about the root privilege issue, definitely when you talk about containers, but at least from what I remember, OpenShift, of course, does not allow root by default. And I think normal vanilla Kubernetes is also moving to rootless as a way of working. How do you see that as a, like, do you see that the cloud native is finally catching up to security, or they're just like trying, pretending to?
Just, I anticipated a question like this a few weeks ago, and in a high critical environment, it was talking about rootless mode in Docker. Just see what does not work with rootless mode. And I don't even know for Kubernetes. And the funny thing is, I was looking at it for that same customer, was even if you create a container which does not run as root, you can actually force it in Kubernetes to run as root. So I think it all depends on where do you use it. If you use that image to run in ECS or in whatever, in Cloud Run, I think the behavior will be totally different. And so where should you fix it? I think fixing as much as possible on the left side so is necessary. And the entire idea about this CNAP thing is kind of obsessed by it because I've been working on it for months right now. The entire thing is to fix as much as possible, to reduce at the end the risk in runtime. Is the risk gone? No, you will have 0 days. If tomorrow there's a 0 day for I don't know what, your runtime is at risk. Yeah, but it's like, yeah, they say in Dutch, dweilen met de kraan open, but at least you have less water. I think you have to do it everywhere. And even if I look at code and Sneak, for example, tells me like, yeah, you're making a mistake here and you have cross-site, I don't know what. I'm looking at it like, I don't know what it is needed. I have a scanner that tells me, hey, your code is not fine, but doesn't know how to fix it. So I know it's difficult, but I can only advise security engineers to think like a developer and a developer to think as a hacker. Like, for example, the stuff which I figured out in the liveness probes and stuff like this. If you talk to the guys that write kubelet, they say it's not an attack. It's behaving as intended. Yeah, okay, if this is behaving as intended, fine, then I can publish it. And then they say, yeah, but you still need access to Kubernetes. But if you remember the arrow I draw, there are so many points where you can attack an ecosystem. It's a kind of a bad idea to think that you've got it all covered. Yeah. So I'm not particularly hopeful, and certainly not with all the AI stuff. If I love Gen AI, but if you go to a Gen AI meetup, it's like they really live in clouds. Yeah, it's like you can do this and you can do that, and nobody really thinks like what could potentially go wrong. Any other questions? I still have 2 minutes.
You mentioned in this slide that it can provide you, or maybe like give you an overview, and maybe put some, you can, based on what it gives you, you can set some priorities, but
it prioritizes itself. Yeah. So, for example, I don't want to talk about what we do, but we have a thing like composite alerts that says, look, we've seen that there is a new location connecting to an SSH host or to an application from a region we've never seen. The security groups are open, and there is a new critical vulnerability with proof of concept code available. Then it will actually say like, run first. Yeah, it would say like it's open, but there is no proof of concept. It might lower it, but at the end of the day, I look at it like, yeah, where to focus first, because at the end, if you scan a container and you get like 2,000 issues, you cannot fix it. So it's always a trade-off of what risk am I actually prepared to take, and depending on your environment, yeah, you will be a little bit more paranoid than others.
Yeah, it's not like, let's say that you don't have really much information on what you want to prioritize. It's not like you say, yeah, prioritize on your runtime first before you start scanning your static.
Look, if I really had to choose between cholera and pest, I would say, yeah, do runtime protection, because then at least you know what happened. But the problem is, there are very, very little tools that can actually do runtime remediation or protection. Yeah, a lot of these tools that claim we do remediation will tell you there is an issue in your Terraform code, go and fix it. And the worst idea that you can have is, oh, this, I don't know what Terraform issue puts AWS at risk, to go into AWS, fix it, because the next time the pipeline runs, it just reverts back. So these tools should help to basically also route requests to, is this really an infrastructure issue? Is this really a code issue? Then you revert it back to the developer. If it is a compliance issue, yeah, route it to the right people. And that's what these tools, but believe me, these are very complex tools. I mean, it's not something you run in a Docker container. Any other questions? Still 30 seconds.
What's your advice to introduce this kind of tools like Bogaerts architects? Let's I also have to reach security principles, and it's sometimes really hard to get people involved in that kind of way of thinking. And it's also really difficult for me sometimes to get this culture mismatch sometimes.
Yeah. I can tell you from experience, if you go in and you say you have to do it from left to right and from top to bottom, you hit so many brick walls and you never get it. What we try to do is when we talk to a customer, if his use case is really, or let's, the guys from identity and access management are the best listener, focus on that, yeah, and focus on what could go wrong if an application has bad EM or a cloud has an EM issue and like this, but go in and say like, I'm gonna fix it all. Believe me, if you turn on all these features, because this is all based on baselining and all that kind of stuff, before these baselines are really effective, it also takes days or weeks. So it's something you have to introduce and for sure not put any blocking thing to begin with. But it takes time, I fully agree. Yeah. All right, thank you.